Welcome everyone to tonight's Campfire and Candlelight story. In this original bedtime story, we join Detective Ambrose Sinclair on another of his intriguing detective adventures. We'll find him in the city of New Orleans, Louisiana, in the late 1800s. We kindly ask that you like the video if you enjoy the story. And now, without further delay, we begin our tale. The gas lamps flickered, casting long, dancing shadows across the cobblestone streets of New Orleans. A gentle mist hung in the air, carrying the sweet, pungent scent of magnolias and decay. In this timeless city, where the line between the supernatural and the mundane was often blurred, lived a man as enigmatic as the city itself. It was in this grand city that Detective Ambrose Sinclair sat in his study behind his imposing oak desk. A flicker of candlelight danced across his sharp features, illuminating the lines etched into his face by years of rigorous thought and countless adventures. His piercing blue eyes, often masked by a pair of spectacles, held a world of knowledge and a touch of weariness. A cloud of cigar smoke curled lazily upward, mingling with the scent of aged leather and the musty aroma of countless books. Sinclair was a rare breed who felt comfortable in both the harsh light of day as well as the murky, unseen shadows of the night. He was a gentleman of refined tastes and a detective of unparalleled skill. His lineage traced back to one of the East Coast's founding families, a heritage that had bestowed upon him a certain air of privilege. Yet beneath the polished veneer of Bostonian aristocracy, there burned a restless spirit, a thirst for knowledge and adventure that had taken him to the far corners of the globe. Sinclair's life had been a whirlwind of experiences. He had served as a soldier, a scholar, and a gambler. His travels had led him to the bustling streets of London, the sun-drenched bazaars of Istanbul, and the shadowy underworld of Paris. It was in the French capital that he had forged a lifelong bond with the legendary Eugène François Vidocq, the father of modern detective work. From the master himself, Sinclair had learned the art of observation, the value of intuition, and the importance of always questioning the obvious. Sinclair turned from his desk and walked to the window. The city of New Orleans, a tapestry of the best and worst this new country had to offer, unfurled before him. Gas lamps flickered, casting an ethereal glow upon the cobblestone streets. The French Quarter, a labyrinth of narrow, winding lanes, was its usual hive of activity. The rhythmic beat of a distant drum mingled with the raucous laughter of revellers spilling out of dimly lit taverns. A dense fog, a constant companion to the city, hung low, obscuring the outlines of buildings and cloaking the river in a mysterious haze. The air was thick with the scent of exotic spices, rich tobacco, and the sweet, cloying perfume of jasmine. The sounds of the city, a cacophony of horse-drawn carriages, street vendors, and the occasional drunken brawl, filled his ears. Sinclair watched as a carriage, drawn by a pair of sleek black horses, glided silently through the fog. The carriage, adorned with ornate carvings and gleaming brass fittings, carried unknown figures cloaked in shadow heading to some unknown destination. As the carriage rode down the street, Sinclair's curiosity was piqued. This was a city of secrets, a place where the line between reality and illusion was often blurred, and he, Detective Ambrose Sinclair, had not recalled ever seeing this carriage in town before. After the carriage disappeared into the mist, Sinclair turned from the window and returned to his study, a sanctuary of quiet contemplation. The room was a testament to his eclectic interests, a labyrinth of bookshelves, scientific instruments, and curious artifacts. A warm fire crackled in the hearth, casting a soft, inviting glow upon the room. As he settled into his armchair, a steaming cup of dark, rich coffee at his side, Sinclair turned his attention to the evening paper. He scanned the headlines, his eyes drawn to the latest reports of crime and corruption. A wry smile played on his lips as he delved into the intricate details of each case, two of which he helped solve. He was a master of deduction, a man who could unravel the most complex mysteries with a keen eye and a sharp mind. As Sinclair plunged deeper into the local news, a peculiar case caught his eye. The body of Mrs. Delacroix, prominent socialite known for her extravagant parties and eccentric tastes, had been found in her opulent mansion. The details were chilling. The victim had been discovered on the floor with strange, arcane symbols etched into the floorboards beneath her body. A shiver ran down Sinclair's spine. This was no ordinary crime. The symbolism, the ritualistic nature of the act, hinted at a darker force at work, a criminal force that defied reason and logic. Intrigued and challenged, Sinclair felt a surge of adrenaline. This was the kind of case he lived for, a puzzle to be solved, a mystery to be unraveled. To solve his cases, he knew that he had to immerse himself in the city's shadowy underbelly, to confront the darkness that lurked beneath its genteel facade. He also knew it wouldn't be long before the local police would come to the Sinclair Investigative Agency to ask for assistance. The agency was just him, of course, and it was headquartered in his study, made it easy to find. There were actually 3 different police forces in New Orleans, and they were poorly organized, poorly trained, and poorly equipped for anything more than managing the drunken sailors on shore leave. It was, Sinclair reflected, the perfect location for opening his private detective agency, one modelled after his mentor's own agency back in Paris. A sharp knock at the door interrupted Sinclair's thought. He opened it to find 2 figures, both imposing in their own way. The first, a towering Irishman named Murphy, had a face weathered by years of hard labour and a physique that suggested a life spent in the boxing ring. The second, a wiry Frenchman named Dubois, had a sly grin and eyes that missed nothing. Sinclair knew them both well. "Detective Sinclair," Murphy began, his voice a low rumble. "We've got a bit of a situation on our hands." "And what might that be, Officer Murphy?" Sinclair replied, his curiosity piqued. "It's the Delacroix case," Dubois interjected, his voice a smooth Creole drawl. "A nasty piece of work, if I do say so myself." Sinclair raised an eyebrow. "I read about it in the evening paper. And what makes this particular case so special?" "The victim, Madame Delacroix, was found in her study," Murphy explained. "Strange symbols were carved into the floorboards, and there were signs of a struggle. The captain asked us to fetch you. Usual rates, of course." "Of course," Sinclair replied. Already intrigued, Sinclair agreed to accompany the officers to the crime scene. Sinclair quickly donned a heavy coat, pulling it tight against the chill of the New Orleans winter. He grabbed a worn leather notebook and a silver pocket watch, slipping them into his coat pocket. As he stepped out the door, he paused, taking a deep breath of the crisp, damp air. The city, shrouded in mystery, beckoned him. "Ready, gentlemen?" he asked, a glint of excitement in his eyes. The carriage ride to the Delacroix mansion was a journey through streets Sinclair both knew well, but was endlessly fascinated by. As the carriage clopped through the fog-shrouded streets, Sinclair peered out the window, his gaze drawn to the eerie beauty passing them by. The spectral figures of pedestrians moved silently through the mist, their faces obscured by the fog. The carriage passed through the French Quarter, a labyrinth of narrow, winding streets. The sounds of the city, a cacophony of horse-drawn carriages, street vendors, and revellers, filled the air. As they approached the outskirts of the city, the atmosphere grew increasingly somber. The carriage road became narrower and darker, lined with towering trees that cast long, ominous shadows. The wind howled through the branches, creating a mournful dirge. Finally, the carriage came to a halt in front of the imposing Delacroix mansion. Sinclair stepped out of the carriage, his heart pounding with anticipation. He was about to embark on a journey into the unknown, a journey that would test the limits of his courage and his intellect. The Delacroix mansion was a Gothic masterpiece, a brooding edifice that seemed to defy the laws of time and space. Its imposing facade, shrouded in a perpetual twilight, was a stark contrast to the vibrant, bustling city that surrounded it. Gargoyles, grotesque and menacing, perched atop the towering spires, their stone faces twisted into eternal grimaces. A wrought iron gate, adorned with intricate designs, guarded the entrance to the property. Beyond the gate, a winding driveway led to the mansion, flanked by a dense, impenetrable forest. The three men walked past an officer standing at the front door and entered the mansion. The interior of the mansion was equally as imposing. The grand foyer, with its soaring ceilings and marble floors, was a testament to the family's wealth and power. The walls were adorned with portraits of past generations, their stern expressions and piercing eyes seeming to watch the occupants of the house. A grand staircase, winding its way up to the upper floors, dominated the space. Sinclair noticed an old woman, who appeared to be a housekeeper sitting quietly in the foyer. The woman appeared distraught and was clutching a handkerchief with both hands while rocking gently back and forth in her chair. The group made their way up the staircase to Madame Delacroix's study, the room where she had met her untimely demise. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with obscure texts on alchemy, astrology, and the occult. A large, ornately carved desk dominated the center of the room, its surface cluttered with papers, inkwells, and a variety of strange instruments. An enormous bay window overlooked the garden, but the heavy drapes were drawn, ensuring the room remained in a state of perpetual gloom. The scene was a stark contrast to the elegant facade of the building. The once opulent room was now a chaotic mess. The victim, Madame Delacroix, had already been removed from the scene. Sinclair knelt beside the symbols carved into the polished wooden floors, examining the scene with a keen eye. The symbols etched into the floorboards were intricate and disturbing, a language that Sinclair had never encountered. "What do you make of it, Detective?" Dubois asked, his voice filled with doubt. Sinclair stood, his gaze fixed on the enigmatic symbols. "This isn't the work of a common criminal, Officer Dubois," he murmured. "There's something more sinister at play here." Sinclair methodically examined the crime scene, his keen eyes missing no detail. He studied the strange symbols etched into the floorboards, their meaning as elusive as the culprit behind this heinous crime. He scrutinized the books scattered across the room, their titles hinting at a wide range of interests, from philosophy to science. One particular book on the desk caught his attention. Larger than the others, it was bound in leather and adorned with intricate patterns. As he flipped through its pages, he discovered a series of handwritten notes, filled with cryptic references and diagrams. The notes seemed to be a personal journal, detailing a series of experiments and observations. Sinclair also noticed a strange device, a brass contraption with intricate gears and dials. It was clearly a tool, but its purpose was unclear. He picked it up, turning it over in his hands. The device felt cold and heavy, its surface smooth and polished. As he examined it more closely, he noticed a series of markings and symbols, similar to those etched into the floorboards. Sinclair realized that this case was more complex than it first appeared. The victim, a woman of intellect and curiosity, had been involved in some mysterious and potentially dangerous activities. He knew that to unravel the truth, he would have to delve deeper into this unknown world Madame Delacroix kept hidden from her socialite circles and people she had associated with. "Murphy," Sinclair said, turning to the burly detective, "I want you to find the last person to see Madame Delacroix alive." Murphy scratched his head, a puzzled look on his face. "Last person? That could be anyone. The staff, the delivery boy, the neighbor." "No, I mean someone close to her," Sinclair clarified. "Someone who knew her well. Someone who might have an idea as to what she was involved in." Murphy nodded, his expression growing serious. "All right, I'll start with the staff. Maybe the housekeeper knows something." "The housekeeper," Sinclair mused. "She seemed rather shaken, didn't she? Perhaps she knows more than she's letting on." "I'll give her another go," Murphy promised. "Maybe a bit of pressure will loosen her tongue." "I appreciate the offer, officer, but I'd like to speak to her myself," Sinclair responded. Murphy shrugged his shoulders. "Your choice. I'll go get her." The housekeeper was a frail woman named Madame Moreau. She was a woman of few words, her face etched with lines of age and weariness. "Madame Moreau," Sinclair began, his voice gentle. "I'm Detective Sinclair. I'm investigating the murder of Madame Delacroix." She nodded, her eyes downcast. "I know," she murmured. "I was wondering if you could tell me a bit about Madame Delacroix," Sinclair pressed. "Her habits, her interests, the people she associated with." Madame Moreau hesitated, a flicker of fear crossing her face. "She was a complex woman, Detective Sinclair," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "She had a thirst for knowledge, a hunger for the unknown." "You mean she was interested in science, perhaps?" Sinclair prompted. Madame Moreau shook her head. "Yes, science, but also darker knowledge. She was fascinated by the supernatural, by the forces that lie beyond our understanding." Sinclair's eyes widened. He pressed on, eager to learn more. "Can you tell me more about these interests? Did she belong to any groups or societies?" he asked. "She was involved in a society that studied the occult," Madame Moreau finally said, her voice barely audible. "A group of people who shared her interest in the occult. They would meet in secret, performing strange rituals and studying ancient texts. It was all very ungodly, forgive me for saying." Sinclair's curiosity was piqued. "Can you tell me more about this society? What kind of rituals did they perform?" Madame Moreau shook her head. "I don't know much," she replied. "I was never invited to their gatherings, but I did hear strange voices, more liking chanting than talking, coming from the old boathouse late at night, whispers and chanting." Sinclair's mind now turned to the boathouse. Madame Moreau told him it was the rundown building at the edge of the property. With this new knowledge and lanterns in hand, Sinclair, Murphy, and Dubois made their way to the large, neglected boathouse at the rear of the estate. The building, once a place of leisure and relaxation, now stood as a decaying relic, its wooden planks warped and weathered. The interior was a dim, damp space, filled with the musty scent of mildew and long-forgotten dreams. They cast the light from their lanterns about as they ventured deeper into the boathouse. It was Dubois who first noticed a poorly concealed door made of rotting wood. Behind the door, they discovered a hidden room, a secret chamber concealed from the outside world. The room was small and dimly lit, its walls adorned with strange symbols and arcane texts. A large, circular symbol, similar to the one found in Madame Delacroix's study, was etched into the floor. "What do you make of this, detective?" Murphy asked, his voice filled with a mix of awe and confusion. Sinclair examined the symbol, his mind racing. "It's a powerful symbol, Officer Murphy," he murmured. "A symbol of darkness and chaos." "If a symbol is powerful, this one is evil," Dubois added, his voice low and menacing. Sinclair nodded. "We've stumbled upon something significant, something dangerous. We must tread carefully, but I do know where we'll get some answers." The next evening, Sinclair walked down St. Claude Avenue and turned into the door of Langford's timepieces. As Sinclair entered the dimly lit shop, the scent of polished metal and fine leather filled the air. Langford, a wiry man with a shock of white hair, greeted him with a knowing smile. Sinclair placed the contraption he had taken from Madame Delacroix's study on the counter in front of Langford. "I'm sure you've read in the papers about the untimely passing of Madame Delacroix," Sinclair said. "This peculiar item was found at the crime scene. I understand you are a fine watchmaker and might be able to assist me in determining its origins and purpose." Langford examined the device with a magnifying glass, his eyes narrowing in concentration. "This is a fascinating piece," he murmured, turning it over in his hand. "It's a timepiece of sorts, but not one that measures the passage of hours and days." "What does it measure then?" Sinclair asked. "The cycles of the moon," Langford replied, his voice barely a whisper. "It's designed to track the lunar phases, to mark the waxing and waning of the moon's cycles." "And why would someone want such a device? What is its purpose?" Sinclair asked. "I don't know," Langford said. "I believe you do, Mr. Langford," Sinclair said. "You see, I didn't just happen to walk into your shop off the street. I know there is no finer watchmaker in New Orleans, much less Louisiana. I believe, Mr. Langford, that you designed this apparatus as only you are skilled enough to make such a thing. And I further believe that if you made it, you would know its purpose and its owner. Now, unless you wish to be considered an accomplice to the untimely passing of Madame Delacroix, I suggest you provide me with a more truthful answer." Langford sighed and stared at the device for several moments. "I made it for Mr. Hernandez." "Mr. Hernandez?" Sinclair asked, his curiosity piqued with this new information. "Who is he?" Langford hesitated, his eyes darting nervously. "He was a collector," he said in a hushed tone. "A man fascinated by the occult, by the mysteries of the universe." "And what was his connection to Madame Delacroix?" Sinclair pressed. Langford's silence stretched into an uncomfortable silence. Finally, he spoke. She was a member of his inner circle, a follower of his teachings. Sinclair nodded, his mind racing. He had a lead, a tangible connection to the cult. He thanked Langford and left the shop. When he returned home, he found Murphy and Dubois waiting for him at his front door. "The captain sent us," Dubois said. "He wanted you to know we found something. A delivery boy claimed he saw a man leaving the Delacroix estate in quite a state." "Yes, that makes sense. Do you know a Mr. Hernandez by any chance, Officer Dubois?" Sinclair asked. "I do." "Go on," Sinclair urged. Dubois shifted uncomfortably. "He's a peculiar fellow. Keeps to himself, always lurking in the shadows. He's often seen in the French Quarter, frequenting the more questionable establishments. Sinclair nodded. Do you know where I might find him? Dubois shrugged. Last I heard, he was staying at a small inn near the river, a place called the Raven's Nest. Well, gentlemen, I believe we know our next destination, Sinclair said with a smile. The Raven's Nest was a dimly lit tavern, nestled in a shadowy alleyway near the river. Its weathered facade and grimy windows hinted at a seedy underbelly, a place where secrets were traded and deals were made. As Sinclair approached the tavern, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was stepping into an unwelcome world, a world of shadows and deceit. This was a place where people didn't want to be found. Officer Dubois, you watch the front entrance. Officer Murphy, you keep an eye on the rear one, Sinclair said. I'll go see if our Mr. Hernandez is inside. The interior of the tavern was dimly lit, the air thick with the smell of stale beer and tobacco smoke. A motley crew of sailors, gamblers, and thieves filled the room, their low voices blending into a steady hum. Sinclair scanned the crowd, searching for any sign of Mr. Hernandez. He noticed a man sitting in a darkened corner, his face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. There was something about the man's posture, his air of quiet menace, that intrigued Sinclair. He approached the man at the table, his voice low. "Excuse me, sir, but I believe I have something of yours." The man slowly lifted his hat, revealing a weather-beaten face. His eyes, a piercing shade of blue, seemed to bore into Sinclair's soul. "And who might you be?" he asked, his voice raspy and deep. "Detective Ambrose Sinclair at your service," Sinclair replied, extending his hand. "I believe this belongs to you," as he pulled the moon watch from his pocket and placed it on the table. Hernandez stared at Sinclair for a long moment, his eyes narrowing. "And what exactly would you like for returning my property to me, Detective Sinclair?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Sinclair nodded, his expression unwavering. "I've come to uncover the truth, Mr. Hernandez. The truth about Madame Delacroix's death and the cult that you lead." Hernandez laughed quietly. "You're a brave man, detective. Or perhaps you're just a man whose curiosity has blinded him to the danger he has found himself." "Perhaps," Sinclair responded. Hernandez stood up, his tall, gaunt figure looming over Sinclair. Sinclair noticed the low murmur of voices dipped. He could feel all the eyes in the tavern turning to the two of them. "You've stumbled upon something far greater than you can comprehend," Hernandez said, his eyes fixed and unblinking on Sinclair. Madame Delacroix also could not comprehend the powers she was shown. Sinclair remained calm, his voice steady. "I'm ready to face whatever comes my way, Mr. Hernandez. I won't stop until I've brought you to justice." Hernandez smiled, a sinister grin that sent a chill down Sinclair's spine. "Very well, detective. Let's see how far you'll go." With one hand, Hernandez grabbed the edge of the table and flipped it in Sinclair's direction, forcing him to stumble backwards. Regaining his balance, Sinclair spun around looking for Hernandez, but he was gone. He knew that he had just taken a dangerous step, a step that could easily lead to his demise. But he was determined to see this through, no matter the cost. Sinclair ran outside and found Dubois leaning against the carriage. "Did you see him?" Sinclair demanded. "Only drunken sailors have come out that door," Dubois responded. Sinclair went to the rear of the building, Dubois in tow. There, they found Murphy sitting on a large barrel, looking confused at the arrival of his two companions. "Officers, we're done here," Sinclair said, with resignation in his voice. The carriage ride home was a silent affair. Sinclair sat in the darkness with his thoughts. The encounter with Hernandez had shaken him to his core. The man's cold, calculating gaze and his sinister smile had left a lasting impression. As they rode through the dimly lit streets, Sinclair couldn't shake a profound unease. It wasn't just the threat to his own life, but a deeper concern. He was used to the gritty realities of crime, the violence born from desperation or passion. But this case was different. It was rooted in a pursuit of knowledge, an obsession with the occult. A chilling thought occurred to him. Could the pursuit of knowledge and understanding, no matter how obscure or dangerous, lead to such wickedness? This was a question that had never crossed his mind before. The once clear line between good and evil had blurred, leaving him contemplating the reality that anything could be the motive to commit a crime. His mentor, Delacroix, had ingrained in him a logical, almost scientific approach to investigations, but there was nothing logical about Hernandez. He wondered what Delacroix would make of this type of criminal. The following week, Sinclair was back in his study, a place of solace and reflection. The events of the past week had taken a toll on him, forcing him to confront the darker side of human nature. He realized that the pursuit of knowledge, no matter how noble, could have devastating consequences. As he sat at his desk, lost in thought, a knock interrupted his contemplation. It was Officers Murphy and Dubois, their faces etched with disappointment. "We've lost him, Detective," Murphy said, his voice heavy with regret. "Hernandez has vanished, disappeared into thin air. Our informants say he's fled to Mexico." Sinclair nodded, his expression somber. "It seems our pursuit has come to an end." "But the crime remains unsolved," Dubois added. "Hernandez, the cult, the dark secrets. There is much we do not know." Sinclair sighed. "For now, yes. But the truth will see the light, eventually." As the two officers left, Sinclair was left alone with his thoughts. He knew that the case was far from over. The cult, with its shadowy network of followers, would continue to operate, spreading its influence and sowing chaos. And he, Detective Ambrose Sinclair, would be there to confront it, no matter the cost. But he would do so with a newfound caution, a greater appreciation for the fragility of life and the mysteries of the unknown. With that thought, he sat quietly. Outside the Sinclair Detective Agency, the rain began to fall.